Have you ever noticed that the version of you everyone seems to love is the one that is currently carrying their weight? There is a specific, quiet kind of exhaustion that comes with being the person who feels everything, for everyone, all of the time. You walk into a room and, without even trying, you begin to map the emotional tectonic plates shifting under the surface of the people around you. You absorb the unspoken grief of a stranger, the jagged frustration of a partner, or the suffocating anxiety of a friend, often before they've even felt it themselves. For years, you might have called this your gift, or perhaps your burden, but you've likely never questioned the cost of being an emotional sponge. But what happens when the sponge is full? What happens when you finally decide that you can no longer be the reservoir for everyone else's toxic runoff? Something strange occurs the moment you stop absorbing that pain. The people who used to rely on your silence start to find you dangerous. They don't call it growth. They don't call it healing. They call it coldness, or worse, they tell you that you've changed in a way that feels threatening to them. It's a peculiar psychological phenomenon where your sudden refusal to suffer on their behalf is interpreted as an act of aggression. Carl Rogers, one of the great minds behind understanding the human self, spoke deeply about the courage it takes to become a person, a real, authentic person. He understood that we often trade our true selves for conditions of worth, those invisible contracts where we agree to be what others need so we can feel loved. If you've spent your life being the empath, the healer, or the one who understands too much, your condition of worth was likely tied to your utility. You were good because you were permeable. You were loved because you were a soft place for their hard edges to land. But now, something inside you is shifting. The walls are going up, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, primal need for self-preservation. As we begin this journey into the architecture of your inner world, I invite you to simply listen with your heart, as if we are two travelers sharing a fire in the dark. If these words find a home in your experience, perhaps you might feel a quiet pull to join our community here, to subscribe and share this space where we value the truth of the human soul over the masks we wear. The danger they see in you right now isn't actually about you. It's about the mirror you've suddenly stopped holding up for them. When you absorb someone's pain, you are essentially doing their internal work for them, allowing them to remain stagnant while you wither. The moment you step back and say, "This pain belongs to you, and I can no longer carry it," you force them to look at what they've been avoiding. To a person who isn't ready to face themselves, your healthy boundaries feel like an abandonment, or even a betrayal of the highest order. They are used to yourself being an extension of their self, a blurred boundary where your identity ends and their needs begin. Rogers suggested that the self-concept is often built on the projections of others, and for the empath, that concept is usually the caretaker. Breaking that mold is an act of psychological rebellion. It is the moment you stop being a character in their story and start being the protagonist of your own. But this transition is rarely peaceful. It is filled with a heavy, clinging guilt that feels like it's woven into your very nervous system. You feel like a villain for simply wanting to breathe. You feel like a traitor for choosing your own sanity over their comfort. Why is it that the more authentic you become, the more friction you encounter with the world you've built? It's because your old world was built on a version of you that no longer exists, the version that was willing to disappear. If you find yourself nodding, or if a specific face comes to mind as we speak, I encourage you to leave a comment below sharing a bit of your story. It helps others realize they aren't alone in this transition. We are taught that empathy is a bottomless well, but even the deepest well runs dry if it isn't fed by the rain of self-acceptance. Stop and ask yourself, when was the last time you felt your own emotions, without them being filtered through the needs of someone else? Can you even remember the shape of your own joy, or the texture of your own sadness, when it isn't reacting to a crisis in the room? The danger people see in you is actually the birth of your autonomy, and that is a terrifying thing for those who benefit from your compliance. They miss the version of you that was easy to manage. They miss the version that didn't have requirements for how it was treated. But the price of being easy for others is usually being impossible for yourself. It is in this space between who you were and who you are becoming that the real friction begins to burn. The transition from being a universal shock absorber to a distinct individual is rarely a clean break. It is more like a slow, painful shedding of skin. When Roger spoke about the process of becoming a person, he highlighted that growth often involves a move away from the expectations of others. But for you, the empath, those expectations aren't just external pressures, they have become the very architecture of your conscience. You have spent so long equating your goodness with your ability to carry someone else's burden that putting it down feels like an act of sin. The world calls it dangerous because a person with boundaries is a person who can no longer be exploited. Think of the relationships that have defined your life. How many of them were built on the silent agreement that you would never say no? When you stop absorbing the pain of a partner, a parent, or a friend, you are effectively breaking a contract they never expected you to challenge. Suddenly, you are no longer the sensitive one or the understanding one. You are labeled as difficult, unstable, or uncaring. This is the psychological tax we pay for authenticity, the loss of the approval of those who only loved our reflections. You might find yourself sitting in a room with someone you love, watching them struggle, and feeling the old, familiar urge to reach out and take that weight from them. Your chest tightens, your heart races, and every instinct you've honed since childhood screams at you to fix it, to soothe it, to swallow it. But this time, you stay still. You breathe. You let the silence sit between you like a physical object. In that silence, you are allowing that person the dignity of their own struggle, even if they experience it as your abandonment. Rogers believed that we only truly grow when we are forced to encounter our own reality, not when someone else buffers the blow for us. By refusing to absorb their pain, you are actually performing the highest form of humanistic love. You are allowing them to be responsible for themselves. Yet, the guilt remains. It sits in the pit of your stomach like cold lead, whispering that you are being selfish, that you are being dangerous just as they say. This guilt is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is simply the sound of your old conditioning breaking under the weight of your new truth. It is the dying gasp of the version of you that believed your only value was in your utility to others. As you step further into this new territory, you begin to realize that the danger people perceive is actually your newfound clarity. You start to see the difference between empathy, which is feeling with someone, and enmeshment, which is feeling as someone. True empathy requires two distinct people. If you have disappeared into the other person's pain, there is no one left to actually be empathetic. You have been a ghost in your own life, haunting the hallways of other people's crises while your own house stood empty and cold. The shift they fear is the moment the ghost takes on flesh and bone and starts to have needs, desires, and limits of its own. They are afraid because they don't know how to relate to a you that isn't constantly trying to appease them. They are afraid because, for the first time, they have to face the consequences of their own emotional choices without you acting as a safety net. This is the dangerous autonomy of the self-actualized individual, the person who is no longer a prisoner of the need for external validation. You are learning that you can care about someone without becoming their dumping ground. You are learning that your sensitivity is a compass for your own life, not just a radar system for everyone else's storms. But as you stand in this new clarity, a terrifying question starts to emerge from the shadows of your mind. If I am no longer the one who carries the pain, who am I? If I strip away the role of the caretaker, the healer, and the martyr, what is left in the center of my being? The answer to that question is where your true life finally begins. And this is where Roger's idea of congruence becomes more than theory, it becomes survival. Congruence is the alignment between what you feel, what you are aware of, and what you express. For years, you may have smiled while resentment quietly pooled beneath the surface. You may have said it's okay when something inside you tightened in protest. Each of those moments created a fracture between your lived experience and the version of yourself you presented to the world. To stop absorbing pain is to begin repairing those fractures. It is to notice the tightening in your chest and honor it as information rather than weakness. It is to trust that your organism, your deepest self, knows when something is not right for you. Rogers called this the organismic valuing process, an inner compass that guides you toward growth. If you are willing to listen, But to listen, you must be quiet enough to hear it. That quiet can feel unbearable at first. Without the constant noise of managing other people's emotions, you are left alone with your own. Old grief surfaces. Forgotten anger stretches its limbs. Desires you buried long ago begin knocking on the door of your awareness. This is not regression, it is integration. You are reclaiming parts of yourself that were exiled in order to maintain connection. There may be moments when loneliness wraps around you like fog, when you stop overfunctioning. Some relationships will shift, some may fall away entirely, not because you have become cruel, but because the dynamic that sustained them has dissolved. It can feel like standing on unfamiliar ground without a map, but this ground is real. It belongs to you. Gradually, something unexpected begins to happen. The anxiety that once flared in every silence starts to soften. You realize that other people's distress does not automatically require your intervention. You discover that you can witness someone struggle without collapsing into it. This is emotional differentiation, the ability to remain yourself in the presence of another's intensity. It is strength disguised as restraint. You begin to experience relationships in a new way. Instead of being the emotional anchor for everyone else, you become a participant. Conversations feel more balanced. You are no longer scanning constantly for shifts in tone, subtle cues of disappointment, or unspoken needs you must preemptively meet. Your nervous system, long accustomed to hypervigilance, slowly learns that it is safe to rest. And with that rest comes curiosity. Who are you when you are not managing someone else's storm? What interests have you postponed? What opinions have you softened to avoid conflict? What dreams have you minimized because they did not fit the narrative of being the reliable one? As these questions unfold, they do not demand immediate answers. They invite exploration. There is a profound humility in allowing yourself to not yet know who you are becoming. Self-actualization is not a performance, it is a process. It unfolds quietly, often without applause. It is built in small decisions, saying no without over-explaining, asking for what you need without apology, tolerating the discomfort of being misunderstood. The guilt that once felt like a verdict begins to transform into a signal, a reminder that you are stepping beyond old conditioning. Instead of interpreting it as proof of wrongdoing, you start to see it as evidence of growth. The part of you that equated love with self-erasure is loosening its grip. And then, one day, you notice something subtle but undeniable. You are no longer trying to earn your place in the room. You are simply there. Present. Solid. You can feel compassion without losing your center. You can offer support without surrendering yourself. You can walk away when something violates your values, even if your voice shakes as you do it. The question, who am I if I am not the one who carries the pain, slowly evolves into something gentler and more powerful. Who might I become if I allow myself to exist fully? In that space, your true life does not arrive in a dramatic revelation. It emerges in quiet recognition. You were never meant to be a container for everyone else's suffering. You were meant to be a whole person, capable of love, capable of limits, capable of standing in your own light without dimming it for the comfort of others. And that is the shift they fear, not because it harms them, but because it reveals that you were never fragile. You were simply unfinished. Rogers suggested that the core of our being is not a static thing we find, but a process we become when we stop defending ourselves against the world. When you stop absorbing the pain, you aren't becoming empty. You are finally making room for your own soul to take up space. You are moving toward what he called the fully functioning person, someone who is open to their own experience without judgment. In this new space, you might find a version of yourself that is surprisingly fierce, remarkably clear-sighted, and unapologetically alive. The people who once called you dangerous may drift away, unable to reconcile this new strength with the softness they once exploited. Let them go. The silence they leave behind is not a void. It is a sanctuary where you can finally hear the sound of your own heartbeat. You will find that as you stop being an emotional sponge, your empathy actually becomes more potent because it is no longer a compulsion. You can now choose to stand beside someone in their darkness without drowning in it yourself. This is the shift from being a victim of your sensitivity to being a master of your own emotional landscape. It is the moment you realize that becoming a person means you are no longer responsible for the emotional convenience of others. The danger they feared was never about you hurting them. It was about you finally honoring yourself. As we reach the end of this reflection, I hope you can feel the weight lifting, even if only by a fraction of an inch. If this journey has touched a chord within you, I invite you to join us on this path of becoming by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your presence and your story are the threads that weave this community together, and a simple like helps this message reach the hearts of those who are still carrying burdens that aren't theirs to bear. You are allowed to be whole. You are allowed to be separate. You are allowed to be dangerous if that is what they call your freedom. Take a deep breath and feel the boundaries of your own skin, the edges of your own spirit, and the quiet power of your own no. The world doesn't need more people who are half extinguished by the pain of others. It needs people who are fully, vibrantly, and authentically themselves. The shift is happening, and while it may be unsettling to those around you, it is the most beautiful thing you will ever do. Walk into the rest of your day knowing that your empathy is a gift, but your life is your own. You are no longer a reservoir for the world's sorrow. You are a living, breathing human being, and that is more than enough. And as this realization deepens, you may begin to notice a quiet stability forming within you, a steadiness that does not depend on being needed. You start responding instead of reacting. You pause before rescuing. You listen to your own signals with the same care you once reserved only for others. In that pause, your identity begins to solidify, not as the caretaker, not as the absorber of pain, but as a person present, grounded, and free to choose love without losing yourself in the process.